everyone for joining us. I wanted to talk about something near and dear to my heart, which is podcasting, but not just podcasting for podcasting's sake. I mean, I think we all have our favorite shows we listen to, personalities that we become attached to and sort of taken into our daily runs as friends. But we've seen over the last couple of years, I think, an increase in podcasting from developers, from sort of people, what I would say are on the sell side, people who are making the products that we all love so much. And what I managed to put together, I have no idea, is a little bit of an A-list of the people doing that kind of work. So I think I'll let everybody sort of run down and just introduce themselves, not that you necessarily need it, but Larry.
I'm Larry Hryb from Xbox Live. Xbox Live's Major Nelson.
James Stevenson from Insomniac Games and the Full Ninja.
Ken Levine from Irrational Games, and I sort of work on Irrational Behavior solutions.
Jeff Green from Electronic Arts. And Shawn from Irrational Games, Irrational Behavior.
Great, so I'm guessing most of you guys are probably pretty familiar with these guys' work. The way I wanted to take the next hour is I have a bunch of clips of various little short pieces of podcasts, some of which is from these guys' work or my work. Some of it's just things that I thought were interesting that have happened in this kind of developer-focused sort of PR-ish podcasting. And I kind of wanted to just have a discussion about that. So first I wanted to play a clip or two from sort of the beginning. Like, what is the point of developer podcasting? And I've got two examples here. This first one is from, let's see. This first one is from Ken. And this was I don't know how many episodes you did, but you did a BioShock podcast for like 4 or 5 episodes. Do you even remember that?
For you?
No, for BioShock. Like produced by you.
What? You're talking about a world where the economic reins are off, the constraints are off. And one of the questions you want to ask is, sort of the yin and yang of that is when you remove all moral, all economic constraints from a society, what does that have an impact on the moral constraints? And the Little Sisters, whether you look at, globalization, in our world, or the Little Sisters in the world of BioShock. And, again, our goal here is not to come down. This is not a polemic. This is not an idea of to come down on any one side of the issue. It's to sort of put the player, like all good fiction does, put the player in the shoes of the actors, the moral actors in the world, and say, what would you do?
So that was the earliest clip I could find of you talking about BioShock, way back in the early PR stuff, and that's I think kind of what we've come to expect from the appearance of a developer on a podcast, just sort of getting some of the bullet points out, talking a little bit more in depth than you might get a quick soundbite off of a magazine article.
It sounded kind of pretentious to me.
He was warming up for the pretentiousness yet to come. But I just sort of wanted to talk a little bit about, do you think that is, just from a pure PR standpoint, Ken, do you feel like that, when you launch, what we're working on now, your mythical project that's coming next, WWON, as I refer to it, do you think that podcasting is a key part of that PR strategy, regardless of what you're doing on your own?
Well,
I need to get on the mic.
Oh, sorry. I think I remember that podcast now. That's not something we produced internally, so I think that was a little more, when we had the chance to do something internally, I think our strategy was to, and Shawn really drove this, was to just start, because we don't have a game to talk about yet right now. And so that gave us a really cool opportunity, because we sort of sat around and it's like, what are we going to talk about? Because we all know each other, and we all know each other, bore each other to tears now. But remembering back when we first met, I thought these guys were Scott's really interesting, like 10 years ago. Nate was really interesting 10 years ago. But so we wanted to give people an opportunity to meet these people. And I think that was a forum that we hadn't seen a lot before. It was basically a podcast about the people rather than a game. And I think we're still figuring out exactly how to do that. And I think when the game comes around, that's going to evolve.
Well, so let me talk to Larry a little about this, because you've been a bit of a pioneer in this, right? I mean, how many shows have you done now?
Officially 250 or 300, I can't even
And so you're not doing one every day, so that's a lot of shows.
It is.
How has it changed over time? I mean, when you started, were you sort of working off corporate bullet points and had to move from there, or what was the genesis?
The genesis was Somebody who has a background in radio, I was sitting at home one day. My wife was gone for the weekend, which is always dangerous. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, and I had my computer open. I'm like, oh, podcast. I could do that. So I busted open one of my audio programs and just recorded one, and it's about 6.5 minutes long. I was sitting at my kitchen table, and it was just me talking about kind of what I was doing that week and what was coming up on Xbox Live. This is way before the Xbox 360 launched. And I used it as an opportunity just to kind of talk about what I was doing. And to your question of where does it evolve to where we are today, which is an hour ago. I had myself and my 3 co-hosts in a room with about 400 or 500 people. It's now a highly structured show. Again, we don't have corporate bullet points. It's about the personality. It's about the fact that I get to work with really smart people like our operations guy, or our policy guy, or our folks, Laura, who writes code for us and works on a platform. So I get to talk to these people about what they do, and the audience makes a connection with each one of them.
So James, I wanted to hear from you sort of on this topic as well, because you guys have sort of been on and off a little bit with the Full Moon podcast, and there was sort of a point where you sort of really kicked it into gear, and it was in the midst of Ratchet & Clank development, and there was a time, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about how things are going, but there was a time when that felt like we had a real window on what was going on in the dev process. Can you keep that up when you're not in mid-cycle with a game that's announced and a community really engaged in what's coming next?
It's tough when there's no game that is announced. Like, that's why we always kind of take that break every year that, well, there's no game to talk about. We can't really tell you what's going on. Ooh, we're looking at concept art. About what? Well, it's concept art. We're figuring things out. We just play tested something. We can't tell you anything more than that. Like, so it's really hard. But, that's something I've always thought was one of our weaknesses. And when we bring the show back in the next couple months here, we probably still won't have a game announced, but we've figured out a lot of content. I think I'm inspired actually by Shawn's work in Irrational, because some of the things they've talked about, we've wanted to talk about for a long time too. And I want to get to the point where the show is constant, and we don't ever have those breaks anymore, and we're constantly talking about things, and we constantly have interesting things to discuss. So we're kind of changing gears a little bit, but that's kind of our new goal for the show.
Right, and Jeff, in your case, you're sort of fronting an organization that's got 11 billion games coming out all the time. So the structure of what you've been doing in terms of podcasting is much more like, it feels much more sort of like a fan podcast in the sense that you're like getting a developer on to talk about their new game.
Right, but the bigger picture of what we're trying to do is just sort of provide, or my vision for the podcast is to put a human face on this giant corporation and sort of show what people do all over the company. Right now it's been very developer heavy. That's partially because it was the holiday season and so games were coming out, and so it seemed like sort of the biggest story that particular week. But really, my vision for it is more that we would bring in not just people who had a game that they were pitching because it was going on sale that week, but artists, engineers, even like people who work in other parts of the EA campus that have nothing to do with making games. Like, I think it would be fascinating to talk to somebody in the legal department about all the legal BS that happens all the time, or people involved in licensing, or even like the chef, what's it like to cook for these fat frickin' game developers. So my co-host Samantha and I, we every week we try to think about what we want to help EA. So we think about, we do look at the release schedule, what's coming out. Does it make sense that we do a Mass Effect 2 podcast this week? Probably. But then there's going to be weeks where there's nothing really pertinent or big happening in EA, and that's where we want to try to fill it in with stuff that's not related to some selling point.
Right. So I hear what you're saying, and as a listener, I will say that that's the most engaging part. Like, when you get to actually feel like you're getting to know somebody, when you're getting a sense of the personality of somebody. I mean, we all get to read the PR stuff, we all read the magazine articles, we know a lot about these games generally before we hear a podcast, so the podcast is the opportunity to get to know somebody. What you guys are doing, Shawn, over at Irrational Behavior kind of went way further than I thought you guys would go in terms of showing us what life is like in the studio. So I have a little clip that you were nice enough to give me from, I think this is your next show, and you can tell me after the fact who it is, because I'm not sure which part of the clip or if you even know. So let's listen to this one.
There's something incredibly rich about an office full of nerds dissing on other nerds. Yeah.